Hello, everyone. Welcome to our final session for the Urbanization Planning and Development Seminar Series for this Lent term 2021. Today we have two speakers with us, and I will introduce their bios briefly, but they will have a kind of collaborative back and forth presentation, as I understand it. And they're going to be focusing on this new book, Open Gaza, Architectures of Hope, which has been edited by one of the presenters, our own Dr. Deen Sharp. And then one of the contributors to that volume, Dr. Salem Qudwa, is going to be talking about his contribution. Just so everyone knows, this is, I know that some of you, maybe this is your first time attending one of these seminars. Many of you, of course, I recognize, but if it's your first time attending, this is recorded, and we will have a Q&A session after the presentation is, the collaborative presentation is complete. For those of you who have not attended before, I'm Ryan Sentner, and I'm Assistant Professor of Urban Geography in LSE's Department of Geography and Environment, and I am the organizer of this seminar series, which it tends to be a guest speaker series, but also highlights work of some of our members of department, members of our department, including right now. So let me introduce our speakers without further ado. Okay. Dr. Deen Sharif Sharp is an LSE fellow in our department of Department of Geography and Environment. He was previously a fellow at the, sorry, I'm trying to admit many people at the same time as I'm reading. He was previously a fellow at the Aga Khan Program for Islamic Architecture at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, or MIT, and co-director of Terraform, Center for Advanced Urban Research. He has co-edited two books. The first one in 2016 called Beyond the Square, Urbanism and the Urban Uprising, the Arab Uprisings, which was published by the Center for Urban Research. And now this second edited book, Open Gaza, Architectures of Hope, which was a collaborative project with the late Professor Michael Sorkin, passed away sadly last year, published by the American University in Cairo Press. Deen has a recent article in Progress in Human Geography on difference as practice, diffracting geography, and the area studies turn. He is currently working on transforming his PhD thesis about urban development in Lebanon into a book provisionally titled Capitalizing Urbanization in the Corporate Middle East, which is set to be published by the University of California Press. In a previous life, so to speak, Dr. Sharp was a freelance journalist and consultant based in Lebanon. He's written for a number of different publications in journalistic publications, and he's also worked for several United Nations agencies, including the United Nations Development Program and UN Habitat, as well as consulting for a range of governments and international NGOs. And last year, relatively recently, he's also become one of two series editors for the Middle East Urban Studies book series at the American University of Cairo Press. Our other presenter today, Dr. Salem Al-Qudwa, is a Palestinian architectural engineer and university lecturer with 15 years of experience working in management and implementation in the humanitarian sector, covering disaster preparedness, emergency response, and recovery projects in the Gaza Strip. His professional design experience has included a range of projects in Gaza with an emphasis on civic buildings as well as reconstruction initiatives. In 2018, one of Salem's projects was shortlisted for the World Habitat Awards, organized in partnership with UN Habitat, and granted a commendation for the Rehabilitation of Damaged Houses project in the Gaza Strip. Salem holds a PhD in design from the School of Architecture at Oxford Brookes University, and he has participated in international urban design workshops in the Middle East and Europe, as well as exhibiting at the Bauhaus School of Architecture and Ashmolean Museum in Oxford. His first solo exhibition was called Beyond Concrete, Everyday Architecture of Gaza for the Humanities and Social Sciences Festival Think Human 2020 in Oxford. He's currently a 2020 to 2021 Conflict and Peace Practitioner Fellow at Harvard University. welcome to both of you, and looking forward to your presentation.
Thank you so much, Ryan. Thank you. Let me just share my screen before I begin. So, firstly, thanks everyone for coming and taking time to let us share with you this remarkable volume that we hope you're going to really enjoy. And it's so hard to communicate through Zoom what like a material object this thing is. And I desperately want to share the actual book with you. So I do hope that LSE, you'll see me walking around with it, showing you on the department, for those of you that are here. You know, this book is obviously all the more special given that it is one of Michael's now last works. And before passing to Salim, who will talk about his specific contribution and the work that he's been doing in Gaza, I just wanted to make a few remarks around Michael, the work that he has produced in specifically around urban studies that I wanted to highlight to our community, the work of Terraform that we've been doing and its imprint, urban research, and then to give you an overview of the contents of the book of Open Gaza, Architectures of Hope, and then passing to Salim. The first thing is to say that unbelievably we're reaching the 1-year anniversary mark of Michael's passing, and that next week on March 26th at 8 a.m. GMT, there will be an event to be held on Zoom, 90 minutes with Michael, that will include the speakers Eyal Weizman, Sharon Zukin, Teddy Foreman, to speak around Michael's legacy, share memories, and also to ask what would Michael do next, because he would, of course, have an enormous amount to say around the events that we're witnessing at the moment, the impact of COVID. But of course, we're here together today because Michael hasn't stopped contributing. And in addition to Open Gaza, this year we'll also see the release of an edited volume that he did on Mike Davis. He also recently just published a book called Nanjing Charter, and many other chapters and contributions and architectural projects are still coming out. For those that don't know Michael's work, you know, as well as being an architect, mentor to young scholars such as myself, he was a prolific writer. For urban studies in particular, I think many of you may know Variations of a Theme Park, which is a foundational contribution to the erosion of public space and the theme parking of urban landscapes across the world. For those, and you know, with my own work that also intersects with what we were doing with Open Gaza around the urbanization and conflict, Indefensible Space was a foundational contribution to that work and engaged also people like Stephen Graham, and of course Eyal Weizman, who've both been at the forefront of those literatures. And to say that Open Gaza is Michael's third intervention into the Israel-Palestine scholarship and debate that brings together architects, social scientists across its various arrays, from anthropologists to geographers such as myself. The first being The Next Jerusalem, the second being a book against the wall, that was against the Israeli wall, and now finally this contribution, Open Gaza. Open Gaza came out of Michael's NGO that he established in 2005, his nonprofit called Terraform, the Center for Advanced Urban Research, that produced completely unsolicited, usually completely underfunded or unfunded projects around vexing urban issues. This has included, for instance, Gowntown, that looked at Columbia's expansion in Harlem, and thinking what actually a progressive intervention by Columbia into Harlem would look like. It also included an intervention in Helsinki that thought of alternative proposals to the Guggenheim and thinking about how actually a progressive, non-corporate art intervention in that urban context would look like. Something that another large project that I contributed to with Michael was sustaining peace in an urban world, where we were again thinking of how violence and conflict is being urbanized and what could be done to mobilize against this. So Terraform, as Michael always liked to say, is a friend of the court. It took up these unsolicited interventions on pressing urban problems to then produce what usually was a book at the end of it. And this is why he established urban research, but equally, Michael was a community builder. So within his enormous community, there was a range of people doing similar sorts of interventions that he helped support, edit, clarify, and then produce into these wonderful artifacts that would end up published by Urban Research. This included my first edited volume that Ryan mentioned in the introduction, Beyond the Square, Urbanism, the Arab Uprisings. It also included books on very influential urban theorists and political scientists like Marshall Berman, and interventions like Spaces of Disappearance that looks at the architecture of extraordinary rendition that have been produced in the context of the war on terror. Today we turn to this book, Open Gaza, Architectures of Hope. This is a wide-ranging examination, both of the Israeli siege and its impact, and trying to visualize that with contributions from organizations like Visualizing Palestine, but also policy experts like Tariq Bakoni, that really detail the extensive damage and constraints that the Israeli siege has imposed, and also details of the experiences of what it's been like in Gaza. Here is a contribution with illustrations detailing the different types of tunnels that have been produced, and someone going back and forth from Rafah to Gaza. But this is not a compendium of destruction and despair. And it was a central motivation of the book to change the narrative and approach of how Gaza is not only represented, but also engaged. So Yara Sharif and Nasser Ghazari, for instance, in their intervention, talk about green stitching and ways in which Gaza's fragmented neighborhoods could be stitched together. Through their fieldwork in Gaza, they undertook a mapping exercise that identified existing initiatives that could be built on, and a proposal for a learning room that would act as a community laboratory for Gazans to learn techniques for self-help construction. This is Terraform's own contribution that Michael led, that was imagining a ring city to integrate Gaza into its urban conurbations and thinking about how these zones of exclusion could be turned into zones of inclusion and not only fulfill Gazans' aspirations, but their right to the city. It also involved imaginative contributions thinking about sustainable energy. Chris Mackey and Rafi Sigal got a proposal for a solar dome for Gaza and thinking around questions of energy consumption and renewable energy. And then finally, to our today's presenter, my dear brother Salem Al-Qudwa, who will present his chapter around everyday architecture in Gaza, drawing on his own vast experience in this territory. Salem.
Thank you. First of all, I would like to thank Professor Ryan for organizing the online seminar series, and it's really difficult not to see all the beautiful faces, but hopefully we'll be united soon, inshallah, in Palestine. And I would like also to thank Dr. Deen Sharp for his wonderful efforts in coordinating, the events about the launch of the book. So today I'm going to give you a brief about my own contribution in relation to other contributions, as well as the situation these days in Gaza. So the title of my book chapter is Architecture of the Everyday, where I offered a visual analysis of the existing objects that surround Gaza inhabitants and the buildings in which they and I live. This is followed by a social and a physical mapping of selected areas in the Gaza Strip, as well as providing a design-based case study for one of my projects over there. Next, please. So I was lucky enough to work on the ground with local communities in the Gaza Strip between 2009 till 2019, even during the period of my PhD. While doing my PhD at the School of Architecture in Oxford Brookes, I got also the chance to return to Gaza to work with local communities, to serve them as the shelter program manager, working with the 3 NGOs. So I work directly with those local communities, serving them, trying to fulfill their needs in relation to the reconstruction process. Next, please. At the same time, during those years in Gaza, I was also a part-time university lecturer, and this gave me a great chance of bringing some reality to the design studios while teaching my students, younger generation of architects, what's the meaning of hope, while using artistic sketches, making imaginative models, trying to bring a better future for the Palestinians over there in Gaza. Next, please. In 2015, I left Gaza for the first time after maybe 15 or 16 years living over there in Palestine with my family, to start my PhD journey. And I'm so thankful for the wonderful and the great architect Abe Hayim and for Nasser Gulzari, for Yara Sharif, when they introduced my work for the first time to the late Michael Sorkin. Actually, it was really an honor to meet Michael twice in London during 2015, and also to present my work to him and to other respected colleagues at the first Open Gaza conference, which took place in November 2015 at the University of Westminster. And from that point onward, thoughts started to being developed around having a book, having a complete volume about the contributors. And maybe Dr. Deen Sharp could give us a brief about the roundtable discussion that took place from 2015 onwards about printing and having the Open Gaza book. Please, Dr. Deen.
Yeah, thank you, Salim. Just to say how this book came about, Michael initiated this book in direct reaction to the violence that was unleashed by Israel in 2014 in Operation Protective Edge. It's important to note that in 2012, the UN issued a report that said by 2020, Gaza would be effectively uninhabitable. And then the Operation Protective Edge was unleashed in 2004, of course, driving Gaza into ever more unimaginable depths of destruction and despair. So Michael, gathered, as Salim was saying, those and was engaged with those in the University of Westminster, and had a series of conversations that Salim would know better than I, because I wasn't a part of, but then had this book that he wanted to produce, and that in 2016, in my position at Terraform, he wanted this to be a Terraform project. But we also then built on these earlier conversations through organizing a series of roundtables at Terraform's office, also through Zoom with people in New York, across the US, the UK, and in Palestine itself, thinking about what are the types of productive interventions that could be produced. And this is why it is so important to emphasize the extent to which this book is an architectures of hope. The conclusion was, of course, to take account of what has happened in Gaza and the destruction and the very real despair that does exist, but to not stop there, to produce imaginative interventions of hope that actually celebrate, not as Michael would always insist in a Panglossian way, that was naively optimistic, but one that was grounded in the limitations that exist, but do not simply slip into these narratives of despair. That there is creativity, there is steadfastness and imagination that exists within Gaza, that could be engaged by those outside of Gaza. And to add that the intention was always for this to be the first step of a longer process. It was that, and I hope we can still achieve it, is to have exhibitions and talks within Gaza with the Islamic University there specifically, but also other universities in Gaza and Palestine, Beirut, for instance, and of course in the US and UK, and to build up these collaborations and to have more publications and more initiatives and more imaginative proposals, and of course with the ultimate aim to push to end the siege. Salim.
Thank you, Dean. Next slide, please. So as all of you know, that Gaza is only 360 square kilometers inside, roughly the same as Las Vegas and the US, or a quarter of the size of London, as you could see in this image. It's currently home to almost 2 million Palestinians, making it widely regarded as one of the most densely populated areas in the world, and leading some to call it as the world's largest open prison. I lived in Gaza for so many years with my family, and I have witnessed, sadly, the attacks on so many parts of the areas. And I mainly work with affected communities in those, areas on the borders areas of the Gaza Strip, as you could see in this map. Next, please.
Sorry, can I just interrupt very briefly? Dean, can you put the slides into full screen mode so it's more visible for our participants? So it looks like it's, go down a bit more, there you go.
So during the 2014 attacks, the Israeli forces instructed the population of Gaza to evacuate a 3-kilometer wide.
Sorry, Salam, now we can't see anything on the slides. I don't know if that's what you see on your end, Dean, but it's just a black screen now. There we go. Great.
So during the 2014 attacks, the Israeli forces instructed the population of Gaza to evacuate a 3-kilometer wide zone. This area was subject to attacks and total destruction, and many people evacuated to stay either with relatives or friends, or others found shelter in collective centers, mainly schools, and people left their homes with minimal possessions. So for geographers as well as for designers and architects, the thickness of the line, the boundary lines, means a lot. It could be a bridge, it could be a river, it could be a street. So you could imagine over here this aerial photo for Gaza, showing that how the boundary lines of Gaza could be extended, dramatically, from few kilometers to up to 2 kilometers or 3 kilometers. And the red zone means that a total destruction by the Israelis for hundreds and thousands of houses over there in the boundary zone. The yellow circle is the place where I'm living right now with my family in Gaza, with my extended family, in the heart of Gaza, only few kilometers from the buffer zone and the border lines of Gaza. And you could only imagine the pressure on the infrastructure that this kind of displacement is making while having those kinds of Israeli attacks frequently. Next, please. Michael Sorkin once defined architecture as architecture does not create only communities, but it can provide a setting conducive for the playing out of collective values. Next, please. Sadly speaking, this kind of definition for architecture is totally missing. Simply, architecture is becoming to be a machine to kill. When concrete slabs and columns are smashing the human bodies, and the rubble and shrapnels killing innocent people. Architecture is becoming to be the graveyard of the inhabitants of the Palestinians in Gaza, the site of memory, and something much more absolute. So again, architecture is not a machine to live rather than a machine to kill people when the Israeli attacks used to take place in those buffer and areas. Next, please. So this kind of unstable economic situation due to the attacks, the shortage in construction materials as a result of a long, blockade and siege against Gaza since the last 13 years, frequent attacks and military operations on the Gaza Strip, the lack of electricity below the minimum humanitarian standards. We still do have electricity cut off for more than 20 hours per day. 20 hours per day without electricity. We used to get electricity for only 3 or 4 hours per day. That means it's very hard for families to cope with this. Although things often forces families to build back lower quality houses. Next, please. Whenever we are talking about houses, let us have a look at those modern and contemporary houses designed by famous and well-known architects in Latin America. The house to the left in Japan, in the middle, and another well-known house in Spain. For those architects, it was the choice of each and every one of them to choose, the style of the house or of these kind of minimal, houses. Next, please. In Gaza, it's not the artistic choice for the Gazans, rather than their dire necessity. Simply, they could not finish or rehabilitate or upgrade their houses. They could not fix doors on the windows. They could not offer to plaster or to tile, the grounds. I'm not talking about a specific group of people in Gaza. I'm talking about ordinary Gazan people who could not offer to have a decent shelter for their extended families and for their children as well. So it's mainly based on necessity. Next, please. As I mentioned earlier, I tried to offer this kind of visual comparison between a house which was designed and built in Japan, the picture to the left, and it was published and printed in a glossy magazine. It got design awards, and another picture to the right showing a silent construction local Palestinian worker, barefoot architects. Those are my masters that I have kept learning from them. He's building a room or a house for his family in less than 2 weeks. Next, please. In 2015, when I moved to the School of Architecture at Oxford Brookes University, I was having a good chance to live and consume this kind of big concrete gray building, which is the School of Architecture is located. It's called John Henry Brooks Building, and the Abercrombie Building where the School of Architecture is located. This building got a couple of awards in 2014 and 2015, being one of the most, sustainable and green buildings. There was an electricity cutoff for 20 minutes at the summer of 2015, 20 minutes, and it was not possible to use the doors, or even while going to the bathroom. There was no water, simply water was based on sensors, so no electricity. That means there is no water coming out of water tapes. And during that summer as well, I realized that poor birds are hitting the facade of the building. So the building is turning to be a machine to kill birds. Next, please. While in Gaza, because of the shrapnels, because of the Israeli attacks, F-16 missiles, facades are a unique house for birds to live and to build their nest and daily life. And almost designers and architects around the world are looking forward how to bring life and this kind of biodiversity in Gaza. In Gaza, it's happening by default, simply because of the attacks that we do have. Next, please. I also thought about innocent people who lost their lives. The face of Dalia, another Palestinian innocent child who got shrapnels into her face. Over here, I'm trying to make this kind of balance and comparison between how the human body is healing its own wounds and how buildings themselves are healing its physical ones. So it was my responsibility, being an architect working over there, to help communities to reconstruct their lives and to have a decent shelters for their children as well. Next, please. So as you could see, buildings in Gaza are characterized by economy with materials, and they are repeated and finished concrete plaster buildings using simple materials because of the blockade and the siege against Gaza. Next, please. As you could see in this picture that I took from the rooftop of our building in Gaza, we are all surrounded by concrete buildings. Concrete is eating up the city. The land is limited, the area is limited, there is no space rather than to go upwards. And columns and concrete is eating up the whole Gaza Strip. Next, please. So while doing my research, I kept asking the following questions to myself. Given the extensive constraints, what's the role of the architect? What's my own social responsibility? What's the social responsibility of geographer, of social workers, of planners working on projects in Gaza? How permanent should be building so they become part of the everyday life of the city and the community? Given also the lack of access to building materials, what's the appropriate type of construction without falling into the mud house, a tent, or a container trap? Next, please. This is, I think, one of the most important slides, and maybe Deen Sharp could have also some feedback in relation to that. Simply, during 2008 to 2009, UNRWA, the United Nations Agency for Refugees in the Middle East, offered to build 1,000 houses out of mud. In 2012, another NGO offered to build sandbag shelters for people who have been displaced and lost their houses. In 2014, another international NGO and another American international NGO offered to build wooden shelters. Simply, I asked them in a very polite way, is it possible to stop having fun in Gaza? Simply, those kind of transitional shelters are breaking the ties of the social fabrics of the extended families in Gaza, as we are going to see in the next few slides, and also questioning the ethics of experimental architecture and technology in Gaza and Palestine. Next, please. In 2016, another artist came to make the so-called Rebel House. Next, please. She took wonderful pictures. She exhibited those pictures in another white, clean box in Holland, in Europe, where visitors are coming to see the pictures of her Rebel House in Gaza. Next, please. At the same year, I wrote an open letter to her, thanking her for her good intention and for coming to Gaza to make that artwork. But at the end, I tried to ask her, is it possible to stop having fun in Gaza? So maybe Deen could comment on this kind of, intervention, which really brings another layer of violence in relation to urban reconstruction, especially in terms of Gaza, Yemen, Iraq, Syria, and Libya. Please, Deen.
Thanks, Salim. Just to add here that there are several chapters that really deconstruct the Gaza reconstruction mechanism that was a tripartite agreement established following Operation Protective Edge. And that this will also be another conversation that we're organizing as part of the Open Gaza launches with UN officials that were involved in the creation of that Gaza reconstruction mechanisms and the critiques within the book. And there is wide acceptance, even within, I think, among some UN officials, that the Gaza reconstruction mechanism did indeed extend more violence than what we would think of as reconstruction. And this, of course, is not only important in relation to what has gone on in Gaza and Palestine, but also broader region. Another set of work that I'm doing in relation to the scholarship I've engaged around this theme of urbanization, violence and conflict is the aspects of how reconstruction is weaponized, and this concept of reconstruction as violence that was part of a conference I put together at MIT and currently working on an edited volume. And I think Simon and I have been in discussion in the importance of linking up firstly the approaches to reconstruction now across the region, because it's not only in Gaza, but also in Yemen, Libya, And of course, Iraq has been going on for years now. And the need to think about what reconstruction and these frameworks are actually doing, and what rebuilding means. A great theme of my work is to try and break this automatic link between reconstruction and the idea of a post-conflict phase, and how the reconstruction can be embedded within war dynamics. And I've particularly been focusing on the case of Syria, in which we're seeing the rise of reconstruction discourse, at least, if not practice. So,
yes, next clip. Thank you, Dean. So as you could see that Gazans are not used to building and living in either mud or wooden houses because of the high cost and the shortage of land in Gaza, as we have seen in the previous slides. Large family lives in a multi-floor concrete building that house the grandparents, children, and married sons and their families. So one of the beneficiaries from a transitional wooden house project said that a wooden house is better than living in a tent for sure. I live with my wife, my 2 daughters, and my 2 of my unmarried sons. My other 3 sons rented homes to live in with their wives. As you could see over here, this is bringing another type of another layer of urban violence and breaking the social family fabric, as we will see in the next slide, please. So over here, as you could see, this kind of, diagram, the sectional diagram, I always prefer to talk about sections rather than plans. Plans are to organize spaces, but sections, vertical sections, architectural sections are showing, the territory of each and every family. So the social infrastructure spatial diagram over here illustrates how different sections of Palestinian extended family live together at a typical urban resident unit in Gaza. The house is shared by several generations of a family, where the elderly parents occupy the ground floor, which is easier for them to access and to move in and out and to receive guests. The first and the second floors are shared by their married sons and their wives and children. On the uppermost level of the columns are left bare in expectation of a future generation that can add more floors if needed. The roof is a shared space between the generations for different activities. So by replacing that typical unit, extended or vertical typical unit, when it's destroyed by the Israeli attacks, by replacing it by a mud house or a sandbag shelter or a wooden house as a transitional solution, we are not only destroying the physical fabric of the city, but also we are destroying the social fabric of the city. Something else that I would like to share with you, and how we could learn also from the case of Gaza during the last year, because of the pandemic in Europe, in the US and Canada, millions of people between the age of 23 and 38, young people between the age of 23 and 38, returned to live back with their parents because of the unemployment. For some of them, it was a choice, but for most of them, it was a necessity. Over here, as you could see in this section, it's by default in Gaza. We are living together. We are taking care of each other. The theme over here is to take care. Younger people are taking care of their parents and their grandparents, while the grandparents are giving the wisdom to their children and grandchildren. Next, please. As you could see, this kind of slow incremental, housing, I'm trying to focus on this kind of slow, unplanned, and the uncertainty of planning. Simply, the father is building the ground floor. Maybe 15 or 20 years later, he will add another floor. So in the Gaza Strip, the lack of urban and regional planning and property management are critical issues. Building licenses are granted liberally, existing land use regulations are often ignored, and urban planning mechanisms are largely absent. At the same time, the population is increasing while the available land is decreasing. In this sense, open spaces have evolved into closed spaces, producing a form of signage that's specific for this kind of, box-like buildings. Next, please. So back to the research question, and this is the most important thing, which will take us to the second part of my chapter contribution and the Open Gaza book. And the question is how to engage the communities in the reconstruction process, how to empower them, how to be a good listener, taking into account their socio-cultural practices. Next, please. To give an answer about this question, I'm offering a design-based case study for one of my projects that I supervised from inception to completion in Gaza between 2009 and 2011, which is the rehabilitation of damaged and poor houses in the Gaza Strip. And it was mainly implemented by the Islamic Relief Worldwide, the international NGO that I worked with during those years. And the main objectives of the project is to give people a dignified roof, a dignified shelter over their heads, and decent sanitation and cooking facilities, and most importantly, dignity. Next, please. So I worked mainly in two, extreme areas in Beit Lahia in the northern of the Gaza Strip, the picture to the left, and in Al Shawka in Rafah, the picture to the right. Next, please. As you could see over here, I kept learning from the people. Those kind of simple things like how they used to make a bed for themselves using concrete and mud on the ground floors, and how they used to use water sinks, bathroom sinks to plant some plants inside their houses. Next, please. But during that time, it was not possible to have any kind of construction materials. So the project team took a hard decision and took some risk dealing with contractors who are purchasing smuggled basic reconstruction material. And this was the only choice to have something and to offer the people a dignified shelter over their heads. Next, please. As you could see over here, I'm discussing one of the options with one of the households, and suddenly he offered that he said to me that I was working as a plasterman inside the occupied Palestinian territories, and I could make the plastering work for my own house. Next, please. And this saved a lot of money, actually, that he worked himself in his house to plaster it from inside and from outside. And this is how the house looked like after renovation. Next, please. Another house was totally, in a bad condition, no walls, no windows, no doors, only concrete columns. So next, please. We discussed many options with the household. Over here, you could see the local site engineer discussing some ideas with the local contractor, offering to have a place for a new bathroom unit. And I also offered to have a small door taking them to their backyard, so the husband and the wife could enjoy having tea or coffee by the end of the day. Next, please. So this is how the house looked like at the end of the project. The family was extremely happy having a new house, a renovated house, a decent shelter. Next, please. In my project also, we offered to add new units like a kitchen, a small bathroom, or a bedroom unit with a small kitchen or a small bathroom attached to it. And we didn't force the families to accept this kind of, design, rather than engaging them within the process and asking them where to put that unit and how it might look like in the future. Next, please. This is the basic unit. The layers having a small concrete slab, which will allow the families in the future to add either horizontal expansion or vertical expansion while having concrete columns. So it will allow them to have expansion depending on their ability. So it's like giving them the hard half that they could not offer, and later on, after 1, 2 years, 5 years, they will have the ability to add another room either in the horizontal way or in the vertical way. Next, please. Talking about little boxes, there were a famous song written in the 60s and the 70s. It's called Little Boxes. Little boxes on the halls and on the hillside, little boxes made of tiki-taki, little boxes on the hillside, little boxes are the same. In my case, next please. In my case, the 167 little boxes were not all the same. Simply, each and every box was designed according to the family needs. in terms of the width of the opening, the height of the windows to protect their privacy, and also to have a balance between their basic needs at that time and the horizontal expansion, which will take place later on. Next, please. As you could see in this picture, while finishing one of the new units, which was only 3 meters from the old unit to the left, the household himself asks us to plaster one of the walls in a rough way and to plaster the other wall in a smooth way. Next, please. As you could see over here, the wall to the right is plastered in a rough way, while the other one in a smooth, because he put into consideration that 1 year later or 2 years later, he's going to add another room to connect both the new unit with his old house. So the smooth surface is going to be the interior wall of his new living area. Next, please. This is a quick sketch that I did at that time. And when I returned back 1 year later, this was what exactly happened. He managed to connect both the new unit with the old house and to have also a smooth surface for the living area and to enjoy a more protective and secure place for his wife and his children. Next, please. As you could see in this simple diagram, I'm showing or tracing or trying to have a forecast for what might take place during 1 year or 5 years or 10 years from the project itself, and how people will manage to close some windows or to close some openings and to attach the new unit with the original unit over here. So as I mentioned at the beginning, it's about giving them the hard half, the concrete beams, the concrete columns, and then giving them the chance or empowering them to participate themselves within the design process. Next, please. This is another house which was in a very bad condition as well, and I highlighted that case study in my book chapter, showing how it looked like at that time without having any kind of windows, doors. And next, please. When I asked the wife about the place that she's thinking that might be suitable to have a new unit, the yellow one, she told me that I would like to have it in front of the mud oven. The mud oven is that brown rounded object to the left. So instead of having the new unit, beside the old unit, she asked me to keep it at least 3 to 4 meters away from the original unit. So I did a quick sketch. It's a live sketch that I did at the site, by the way. And I asked the contractor to make a connection, a concrete connection between the old unit and the new unit in order to respect her choice and to respect her preference, and to give her the chance to enjoy cooking and using the mud oven as well. So the new unit is a kitchen and a small bathroom, and you could see the sketch for the plan, having a space around 3 to 6 meters and the vegetation that it used to have. Next, please. And this is how the house looked like after 1 year. And believe me, the lady have the best view all over Beit Lahia from that small window placed in her kitchen. So she used to enjoy having breakfast, lunch, and dinner with her family inside the renovated rooms, while walking in that protective link between the kitchen, the bathroom, to use the mud oven and to make bread, not for her family itself, but for the entire, neighborhood. So we are talking about this kind of collective, activities shared by the communities themselves and being good listeners to their needs. Next, please. I also encourage the household to bring some vegetations and plants to their front yards and backyards. Next, please. A quick sketch I did for one of the households to encourage him to plant some trees, also asking his children to draw quick sketches and drawings over the sketches. Next, please. 1 year later, after visiting the house, he managed to plant the trees around the house. The house was entirely, renovated from inside, while adding another room to the back side of the house itself. Next, please. some units in Rafah al-Shoka. I was so happy to see how they have managed to maintain the new housing unit and to add some vegetations here and there. Next, please. 1 year later, I visited one of the houses. So the old house or the old unit is at the back yard of the picture. The new unit is to the right. Next, please. 1 year later, the household added another unit to connect the old house with the new unit and making a space for one of his newly married sons. And he was extremely happy that the project gave him the chance to add and to contribute to the daily life of his children and to have this kind of unique, space for his newly married, son. And some of the beneficiaries make it clear that if we have waited for 20 or 30 years, no one is going to have or to give us such a contribution, because simply it empowered them to add later to the existed, houses and to the new housing unit. Next, please. So in total, the cost of the renovation for each and every unit didn't exceed the amount of $5,000 in comparison to the regular one. So we had given them the minimal, things, but empowering them to add later. And it took only 5 months to renovate and to reconstruct around 70 housing units, which was the first part of the project in Beit Lahiya, northern of Gaza. Next, please. In terms of the labor force, and this is the most important thing, that the project gave tens and hundreds of job opportunities to unemployed, people who used to work inside the occupied Palestinian territories as construction workers. And it was successful in generating the sense of self-worth and self-respect by involving some beneficiaries in the design and the rehabilitation process, and most importantly, to give dignity to the people over there in Palestine. Next, please. As you could see over here, one of the beneficiaries who worked himself as a worker, he's mixing the cement with sand. He was extremely happy that the project gave him the chance to rehabilitate the house himself. Next, please. As it was mentioned at the beginning, the project was shortlisted for the 2018 World Habitat Awards, and I think it was a good recognition for the work of our teams over there, for the work of the social workers, for the work of Palestinian site engineers who are working very hard day by night to serve local communities and to give them the decent shelters that they really deserve. Next, please. In 2016, I returned back to some of those communities to conduct my field work, but this time as a researcher for my PhD, not as an architect. And I really witnessed the difficulties being a researcher, not an architect, having authority or some power to reconstruct their houses. But I took the chance to do some social mapping and physical mapping for another design project, which is a prototype housing design project for communities in rural and marginalized areas in the Gaza Strip. Next, please. During that period, I tried to trace the movement of women, children, and men inside and outside their houses in terms of living in Gaza under the extreme blockade, under the electricity cutoff, and how they have managed to survive during their daily life. Next, please. Most importantly, I also traced the natural growth and the physical expansion of each and every housing unit through the period of 15 and 20 years. And as you could see in the above, diagram, how the families initiated their own house, 5-10 years later, how they have managed to add another one, having a small courtyard in between for daily activities like laundry hanging, cooking, for the children to play, and later on how it's possible to increase that housing unit either in the vertical expansion or the horizontal. And frankly speaking, I learned a lot from that experience, and it helped me to guide my own design in the right direction and offering them good options. Next, please. At the end of my research journey, I also offered 5 design participatory sessions with families inside their houses. So rather than isolating men away from women in a community hall or a community center, I took some risk, and I took some efforts to visit them individually at their houses, offering them the chance to share their voices. Even the children participated in this kind of design sessions using the basic materials such as sketching boards using chalk or wooden materials, or even concrete blocks. And as you could see over here, one of the wives is and drawing the layout for her dream house with their husband. And of course, I was in regular touch with them, offering them the feedback about the initial design, and also sharing with them the development of the design that I was working on, and getting some feedback from them in regular meeting that took place while I was in Oxford finalizing my PhD project. Next, please. To summarize, the design project is which was offered in this booklet chapter, or the other one that I was working on, is looking at a potential life project which can explore alternative use of materials, including the notion of home and learning related to specific cultural practices in Gaza, and also to take every opportunity to build something tangible on the grounds of Gaza, and to investigate how much materials will be accepted in according to the sociocultural, activities in Gaza. Next, please. Finally, I did this quick sketch and I showed to the late Michael Sorkin, and he liked it a lot. I did that sketch during the Open Gaza conference, just trying to imagine how Gaza might look like later. The open spaces, the falafel and hummus, people selling falafel at the entrance of the neighborhood. You could see the cart of the donkey. The children are playing and flying their kites, and the sea, which is the main access to the people. And Gaza is a beautiful place. Palestine is a beautiful place, and I really hope that all those efforts will contribute in making a meaningful and a tangible, change for our people over there. Thank you so much for giving me this opportunity. Thank you for Ryan. Thank you for Deen Sharp. And inshallah, we will see you soon one day in the beautiful Palestine. Thank you. Shukran.
All right. Thank you to Deen and Salam both.
Thank you.
And now we have plenty of time, about half an hour, for questions. So I'm happy to collect some, maybe take 2 or so at a time, and allow our speakers to answer. Anybody have a question they'd like to go with first? I know there are questions out there, given that we had such a rich presentation and we have more participants than usual today, sign of popularity and interest. Okay, so we have a first question from, I believe it's Abe Haim.
Abe, you're on mute.
Hello, Salim. Wonderful to see you, and thanks for the brilliant discussion and your wonderful work in Gaza and being developed in Harvard. Now, the current situation in Gaza is even more dire. You know, the blockade has increased, the whole tension, the destruction, the continual bombing of Gaza, the strangulation of it. How do you see this work being able to be continued within this terrible scenario? And what chances are there of really developing all these wonderful ideas and Michael's ideas and turning Gaza back into the wonderful strip that it really was, you know, in the early days?
Yeah, thank you, Abe, for all the wonderful efforts and for being in touch and the encouragement that I had got from you through the period of my PhD journey. Thank you so much. So in relation to the chances, I'm still optimistic. Actually, during the last year, because of COVID, you know, all over the world, it was the call to stay at home, you know, stay at home, stay at home. Okay, simply stay at home could be an easy thing over here in the US or in the UK, but you could imagine in Gaza, asking people, because of the overcrowding over there, asking people to stay at home, it means like, putting them in a gas room, because, the average family size over there is 6, 7 plus, and the limited area, no open spaces for children to play. So I think the chances are still high by being good listeners for the community. Reconstruction is taking place, but it's very slowly. And to participate in this kind of incremental, structure, as we could say that solution could not be achieved, at one step rather than in 2 phases. So what I'm offering over here is, first of all, to be good listeners to the community, either in Gaza, in Syria, in Iraq, and Yemen, including the people within the process of the design, and sharing their voices, and to have a respect to their voices, because, we are learning from the people. We are not this kind of architects who are forcing them to accept our designs rather than including them within the process. So if we could do that thing, I think the chances are going to be very high to empower the people and to give them the dignity that they are looking for. And as you know, the people in Gaza are hardworking people. Just give them the chance, and they will not be dependent on any kind of humanitarian assistance, any kind of food parcels, any kind of Gaza reconstruction mechanism. Just give the chance to the people, and just, lift this kind of blockade and siege against them, and they will work very hard, and they will surprise you. Right now, I got so many surprises that people have managed to reconstruct the houses themselves by very, very minimal means. They want to survive. They have no other choice, actually. So I think the chances are very great.
All right. I have a question myself, but does anybody else want to start to ask questions? Okay. We have Barak would like to ask a question. If you can just speak up, but if you'd like to use the raised hand feature, then it's quite easy for me to track who wants to speak. Barak, go ahead.
First of all, thank you very much, Jazakallah, for this presentation. I think it was really insightful, especially because it's not that easy to get insight, local insight into Gaza. But what I was thinking about, you mentioned, Salem, a lot of times about the social fabric, and even the book's name, Open Gaza, connotates somehow and the social fabric. So what is it about? So I was thinking, let's say, about the notion of congregational places, let's say mosques or bazaars, so how they are constructed, or how people perceive in this context of warfare and violence, and somehow the production of this, let's say, I don't like public space to say, but somehow this open space regarding, in contrast to the housing you mentioned.
Yeah. Jazakallah khair, brother Barak, for your very good question. As you mentioned at the beginning, it might be a rare chance, actually, for me, being an architect from Gaza, to be engaged in such an international work, because, having access to Gaza or having access out of Gaza is extremely difficult. And it was a dream to have the late Michael, to have Ibrahim, to have all of you to participate in the launch of this wonderful book inside Gaza, but it's extremely difficult. So that's why we have this kind of virtual thing. In relation to your question, while doing this kind of mapping for the movement of the people between their houses, outside their houses, and in between the spaces, I realized the importance of having these kinds of buildings. Simply, people used to go to the mosque for prayers, of course, and also to charge their mobiles because of electricity cutoff, and also to have access to more clean waters. So over here, more attention should be given to those kind of buildings, and to have this kind of balance between providing decent shelters, housing, housing utilities for the people, and to provide also these kinds of buildings or open spaces, because, the limited area and the shrinking of land. In terms of the social fabric, when I showed that vertical section, I was trying to bring the attention to the important fact that who's taking care of whom. The grandparents are taking care of their children and grandchildren, and the grandchildren are taking care of their elderly parents and their grandparents. So the theme over here is to take care of each other, and this is by default is in Gaza. So we have to protect this kind of value rather than destroying it. So what I was trying to say over here, the reconstruction efforts that had good intention is not giving this kind of attention to the social fabric which has existed either in Pakistan, in India, in Syria, in Iraq, in Yemen. And we have to have a clear, ear to those needs, and we have to learn from the people, simply as that.
Right. So I have a question that is, it's going to sound a bit critical, but it's a genuinely open question. And in some ways, it can relate to part of what Barak was just asking about spaces outside of the home. Now, clearly, homes are fundamental for people to have a place to rest and to commune with their families, etc. But the presentation that we received about efforts to reconstruct homes and how to do research on this is very much centered on a kind of heteronormative, traditional, multi-generational family where you have a mother and a father, you might have a grandparent generation, and then you maybe have adult children and the adult children's children. So I'm wondering about, this clearly is that characterization would fit many, many people in Gaza as it would anywhere in the world. But what about people who don't fit that, who don't have that kind of traditional family structure that could correspond with this effort to provide multi-generational housing? Is there any way in which there's some sort of recognition that not everybody fits that?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, for sure. Thank you so much for your very good question. Of course, this kind of extended family structure is not, the perfect thing for everyone, because it also creates some conflict. You could imagine, people living all together as, uncles. And I myself faced that thing while living with my extended family for a couple of years. So I totally understand what's the meaning of that question. Of course, similar to other places in the world, we have this kind of residential, housing blocks funded by either the Qataris or the Emiratis or the Saudis. So we do have this kind of, high rise, residential blocks. And it's also the preference for a newly married couple to move out of the extended family structure. It's their choice either to rent or to buy a new apartment or a new flat at those residential buildings. So I totally understand that this is not a perfect solution, but it's maybe the preference to most of the families, especially if we are talking about rural and marginalized areas within the Gaza Strip, because this is the last chance for Gaza to have something unique in terms of social housing. The urban area, such as the main cities in Gaza, Khan Yunis and Rafah, it's full of concrete. There's no possible way to have an open space in those, very crowded cities. But my research was mainly focusing on rural and marginalized area, as I showed in my last sketch, that how to stitch this kind of urban with rural areas, because this is the last chance for urban planners, for geographers, for social workers, for architects and designers to have a unique chance to design and to build something in relation to social housing.
Right, thank you.
Not all.
Other question? Dalia.
Hi, Salim. Thank you so much for that presentation. I thought it was really, really interesting. I wanted to ask if I thought that was a really interesting, you mentioned at many points this the importance of concrete and the kind of assumptions and the political status of concrete, that concrete is something, its importation is banned, it's the concrete factories are bombed, and that seems to me a deliberate attempt to destroy people's conception that they can build stable, resilient homes that can withstand. It's sort of a part of the occupation's forced precarity. And I wondered, that in relationship to the stackable housing that you talk about, where it's like, okay, I build my first layer, and then with the anticipation that in 15 years, my child and their family will be able to build an extension to that. And I wonder if there was if you could comment on either the tensions or the importance of that insistence on concrete and futurity and the implications of planning and futurity in a context of enforced precarity. And also, you know, I was thinking, you know, the fact, as you mentioned, you know, the no-go zones, and how suddenly in a moment the splintering and the kind of destruction of the city can happen at any point. I don't know if that makes sense, but I wonder if you...
Yes. Yeah, thank you so much for the good question. Actually, if you have seen that vertical section when I'm talking about the social infrastructure, someone asked me, Salim, why you are showing, I mean, the structural foundation of the building? You are talking about the social fabric, so there is no need to show the structural foundation. What I was trying to say over here, that you could not separate, I mean, the physical from the social. This is what the main theme and the focus of my research was about. So simply, the household will sell the gold of his wife in order to invest in building a strong concrete foundation, knowing that, in his mind, knowing that 15 or 20 years later, those investment that he invested in building strong foundation, he will later fund it by adding another layer, as you mentioned. So one of the surprises that I had got while working with a couple of families in the buffer zone, that the Israelis destructed the whole building. And I was thinking that it might take them so many years to reconstruct the whole building. To my surprise, they returned back and they replaced the old one with half of it also with stronger concrete, I mean, foundations. And they wrote on the facade of the building, وَإِنْ عُدْتُمْ عُدْنَا. If you return back to destroy my building, I'm going to rebuild it again. So it's the notion of the permanence, because the Palestinian people are uprooted from their land. And the notion of permanence is standing, I mean, in the front of all those things. So وَإِنْ عُدْتُمْ عُدْنَا, if you destroy it, I'm going to build it back. It's showing this kind of, I mean, only option against the whole destruction. The only hope that they have, because they have nothing. They have learned that if they have waited for international NGOs, the international NGOs are going to provide them either with cash assistance, with food parcels, or with this kind of transitional shelter solutions, which is not responding to their, I mean, sociocultural needs. So they have learned. So that's why I'm giving this kind of emphasis that Gaza should be a unique design-based case study for what's going on in terms of reconstruction in the region, as Dr. Deen Sharp just highlighted, I mean, in Syria, Iraq, Yemen, and Libya. So exactly, it's this kind of permanence, as you have mentioned. It's the permanence against uprooting them again from their own land. Thank you.
All right, other questions, which could be specifically for Salem in this presentation, could also be about the book more broadly. Yes, go ahead, please.
Hello, I'm sorry to come back again. I'd like to hear some other people, taking part. But just to bring it back to the current, the political situation in Gaza, when you talk of open Gaza, what we really want is for Gaza to be opened. We want those terrible Israeli naval vessels, that bomb Gaza fishermen, killing them. We want, what about all the disabled young people, that have had their legs shot at and, destroyed, and all the disabled people, in Gaza? What is, how are they being catered for? And how is Gaza managing, with the terrible pollution of the sea, with the sewage and the, the lack of ability to cleanse, the sewage plants? All these sort of massive obstacles to really allowing Gaza to live, the taking away of half the land of Gaza from the boundary. I mean, these are all obstacles that need to be removed to allow Gaza to breathe. So I think it's very important that, political pressure is continued, to be pressured from the outside, to reveal what is happening, this terrible attack on people's lives, this nightmare. And it's a wonder how Gaza manages, to survive, with all these obstacles. And, Salam, what do you suggest that we do from the outside, to try and at least relieve this terrible pressure and open up Gaza to allow them, to be able to develop their own lives again?
It's really a hard question, Abe. Just keep us in your prayers, because right now I'm thinking about how is it possible to return back to see my parents in Gaza. It's extremely difficult. You could imagine that you still need a permit from someone, either that side or this side, to have access back to your house in Gaza. So all we need is to keep the people of Gaza and the Palestinian people in general in our prayers, and to empower them. As I told you at the beginning, I mean, solutions should be in phases, incremental phases. So I hope that this year, the next year will bring, I mean, better future to the people over there. I hope so.
Inshallah.
Inshallah, 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 inshallah.
Okay, Melissa has a question.
Thank you. That question is a bit hard to follow, but I'll give it a try. Thank you very much, Salam and Deen, for your work here. I've been thinking about it in relation to what reconstruction in Syria might mean and could look like in different Syrian cities. But one question that I have, based on the examples that you raised of the transitional shelter solutions that you argued was sort of creating these new situations of violence, a certain kind of violence that's forcing people to live in shelters that are counter to how they might actually organize their families and lives. I was wondering if you could talk about what kind of resistance there has been to those kinds of projects.
Yeah.
The large-scale shelter projects that UNRWA or others have been undertaking, and what kind of accountability you see needs to be in place to prevent that kind of violence from happening.
Yeah, actually, it's a hard task, actually, simply because it's like, I mean, take it or leave it. You could imagine, I mean, the situation of God forbid your family or my family passing through such, I mean, a similar situation. So it's like, I mean, someone is giving you a food parcel after the destruction of your house, and you have almost lost everything. So take it or leave it. If you are not going to take it, thousands and thousands of people are, I mean, in that long waiting list. So the good thing that the people over there started to learn, I mean, the wisdom behind, I mean, leaving their communities, because some of the projects are offering to pay them a cash assistance in relation to rent a flat outside their neighborhood. So taking them from their own neighborhoods outside. So people started to reject such projects, because taking them from their own neighborhood is mainly uprooting them again from their extended families and isolating them from the extended family. So the wise people started to learn from those things, and also they started to reject such things on the ground. In my case, being the shelter coordinator or the shelter manager for a couple of programs, I also faced that thing, trying to convince the senior managers, the international senior managers who are coming with good intention to serve the people over there. So first of all, we are not speaking the same language of the people, sadly. Most of those international NGOs are having a different background, and they are trying to copy solution either from India, Afghanistan, Syria, Iraq, Somalia, Yemen. And with respect to all those countries, each and every locality has its own context. Even, believe me or not, while working with local communities in Beit Lahia, which is only a few kilometers from Rafah, I mean the southern and the northern part of Gaza, people within that limited, I mean, area of land, they used to speak slang Arabic in a different language. So, for example, for me, being an Arab, a Muslim, my name is Salam. While dealing with the Bedouin community, I changed my name to Swaylam, which is a Bedouin name, trying to convince them that I do understand their language. But they used to start, I mean, immediately speaking in Bedouin language, which I could not understand, being an Arab even. So what I want to say over here, speaking the same language is very important. Understanding the language of the local people, understanding their needs and aspiration, and giving them the voice. So I do not need a translator, because if I'm in need of someone to translate to me, something could be missing in this kind of translating. So I could not suggest a house for people in Latin America, because I didn't live in Latin America or in the US or in England for a while. So it was a struggle at the beginning, but thankfully, by repeating the same thing again and again, by giving more lectures, by bringing this kind of design-based case study, things are started to change gradually on the grounds that we have to localize, I mean, the humanitarian effort. We have to give the voice of the people without putting so many titles like resilience, sustainability, conflict. So at the beginning of my research, by the way, and despite the fact I was still self-financing my PhD in Oxford, which was very expensive actually, but I promised my supervisor that I'm not going to mention 3 words in my research: sustainability, resilience, and conflict. Simply translating those 3 words in Arabic, it means nothing to the ordinary, I mean, Palestinian man or the ordinary English or American man who's struggling to pay his utility bill, who's, I mean, living from check to check. Resilience means niza' sira', sustainability, al-istidama. So let us learn from the people, let us speak the same language, and let us convince and put more pressure on those international NGOs to include the people within the process, not to bring them to a community hall and to take some pictures and to distribute colorful cards and markers and to tell the whole world that we are doing participation. This is an abuse for participation. Participation should be at another level, at the grounds of the households, including the women, the children, the elderly, including everyone. It might take some time, but the end will be very successful. Thank you.
All right, we are just about out of time for our session. Does anybody have a last question they would like to ask? All right then. Please join me in that case in giving another round of applause to our presenters, Deen Sharp and Salam Al Qudwa. Thank you very much, guys.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Ryan. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
And we look forward to being able to get to the book at some point. And yes, we will look forward to more work from both of you. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Ryan. This was so kind of you. Thank you so much for hosting the event, and thank you for Deen for all the effort. Thank you. See you soon, inshallah, in Palestine. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Ryan. Thanks so much, everyone.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.